Had you ever wondered how an entire royal capital could simply disappear, or how a kingdom powerful enough to rival Egypt could vanish so completely that even its location became a mystery? Across the Bronze Age, great cities rose, empires flourished, and rulers left behind monumental monuments. Yet some of history's most important places slipped into silence, leaving only scattered clues. Today we begin the search for one of the ancient world's greatest missing capitals, Tar-Huntissa. The lost Hittite capital of Tar-Huntissa, history often remembers civilizations through the cities they built. Rome has its Forum, Athens has the Acropolis. Babylon is forever linked with its towering walls and legendary gardens. But every so often, historians encounter a city that seems to have stepped out of existence entirely, not because it was small or unimportant, but because it was once powerful enough to govern an empire before disappearing so completely that archaeologists are still searching for it thousands of years later. That is the mystery of Tar-Huntissa. Unlike mythical cities born from legend, Tar-Huntissa is known to have existed. Ancient records mention it by name. Kings issued official decrees from there. Diplomats recognized its importance. Yet despite decades of research, no one can say with complete certainty where this remarkable city once stood. The search for Tar-Huntissa has become one of the greatest archaeological puzzles of the Bronze Age. To understand why this mystery matters, it helps to step back into the world of the Hittites. More than 3,000 years ago, the Hittite Empire emerged as one of the great powers of the ancient Near East. At its height, it controlled vast territories across what is now modern-day Turkey and extended its influence into Syria and neighboring regions. It rivaled Egypt, negotiated international treaties, commanded powerful armies, and developed an advanced administrative system that connected distant provinces through carefully organized networks. Its rulers governed from monumental cities filled with temples, palaces, archives, and defensive walls built from enormous blocks of stone. The best known of these cities is Hattusa. Today, visitors can still walk among its massive gates, impressive fortifications, and the remains of royal buildings that once served as the heart of the empire. Thousands of clay tablets recovered there have transformed our understanding of Hittite politics, religion, diplomacy, and daily life. Yet the story becomes far more intriguing when those tablets begin mentioning another capital, Tar-Huntissa. This was not a minor settlement or a provincial outpost. Historical documents suggest that at one point it became one of the empire's principal centers of government. Some texts even indicate that the royal court temporarily relocated there during a period of political and environmental change. That decision immediately raises an important question. Why would an empire abandon its established capital? Several explanations have been proposed. Some historians believe changing political conditions made Hattusa increasingly difficult to defend. Others point toward environmental pressures that may have affected agriculture and water supplies. There are also suggestions that relocating the royal court allowed Hittite rulers to strengthen control over southern territories that had become strategically important. Whatever the reason, the move appears to have been significant. Transporting a royal administration in the late Bronze Age was no simple undertaking. Officials, scribes, soldiers, religious leaders, artisans, and support staff all formed part of the machinery of government. Important archives, ceremonial objects, and administrative records would also have traveled with them. A capital represented far more than a collection of buildings. It was the political heart of an empire. If Tar-Huntissa truly served that role, it must have been an extraordinary city. Yet unlike Hattusa, no universally accepted archaeological site has revealed itself as Tar-Huntissa. This absence is remarkable. Cities of such importance usually leave unmistakable traces: massive foundations, palaces, temples, storage facilities, administrative archives, royal inscriptions. Instead, researchers find themselves piecing together scattered clues preserved in ancient texts. Those texts offer fascinating glimpses without providing precise directions. Some describe journeys between cities. Others reference nearby regions, rivers, or mountain ranges. Royal decrees mention Tar-Huntissa as though everyone at the time knew exactly where it was. Unfortunately, those ordinary geographical references have become much harder to interpret after more than 3,000 years. Landscapes change, river courses shift, settlements disappear. Ancient roads vanish beneath fields and modern towns. What seemed obvious to Bronze Age scribes now requires careful detective work. Archaeologists therefore approach the mystery from multiple directions. Rather than searching randomly across vast landscapes, they combine historical records with geography, satellite imagery, excavation results, and environmental studies. Each source provides another small piece of the puzzle. One inscription may narrow the search to a particular region. A newly discovered settlement may match descriptions found in ancient tablets. Patterns of Hittite administration help identify areas likely to have hosted major political centers. Still, certainty remains frustratingly out of reach. Several archaeological sites have been proposed over the years. Each possesses strengths. Each also presents challenges. Some contain impressive Bronze Age remains but lack decisive inscriptions identifying the city. Others fit geographical descriptions while missing evidence expected from an imperial capital. The search therefore continues. Interestingly, the mystery is not simply about finding one lost city. It also reflects how fragile historical memory can become. Entire capitals can vanish beneath centuries of farming, erosion, rebuilding, and natural change. Stone blocks are reused in later villages. Mud brick walls gradually dissolve back into the earth. Wooden structures disappear almost entirely. Without written records, many ancient cities would have been forgotten forever. Tar-Hanasa survived in memory only because Hittite scribes recorded its name. Even then, the records leave us asking more questions than they answer. What did the city look like? How large was its population? Did it rival Hattusa in architectural grandeur? Or did it serve as a more practical administrative center designed for political necessity rather than monumental display? These questions continue motivating archaeological expeditions across central and southern Turkey. Modern technology has transformed that search. High-resolution satellite imagery allows researchers to identify subtle patterns beneath agricultural fields. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures without excavation. Geophysical surveys detect walls, roads, and foundations hidden beneath the soil. Drones create detailed three-dimensional maps of landscapes that once supported Bronze Age settlements. Each new method increases the chances of identifying forgotten cities. Yet technology alone cannot solve every mystery. Ancient texts still require interpretation. Archaeological evidence must be placed within historical context. One discovery often creates new questions instead of immediate answers. That careful process defines archaeology at its best. It is not a treasure hunt. It is the patient reconstruction of human history from fragments that have survived thousands of years. And few mysteries illustrate that challenge more clearly than the search for Tar-Hanasa, the lost Hittite capital of Tar-Hanasa. Imagine standing on a quiet hillside somewhere in central Turkey. Wheat fields stretch toward the horizon. A small farming village rests in the distance. Birds circle overhead, and nothing about the landscape suggests that beneath the soil could lie the remains of one of the most important political capitals of the late Bronze Age. That possibility is exactly what makes the search for Tar-Hanasa so fascinating. Unlike famous archaeological sites that announce themselves with towering ruins, many ancient cities remain completely hidden. Thousands of years of natural erosion, earthquakes, farming, and later settlements can erase almost every visible sign of an earlier civilization. Massive stone walls collapse. Mud brick buildings slowly return to the earth. Roads disappear beneath layers of sediment. Eventually, an entire city can become almost invisible. For archaeologists, that means the search often begins not with dramatic discoveries, but with tiny clues. One fragment of pottery, a broken seal, a section of ancient roadway, an inscription carved into stone. Each piece may seem insignificant on its own, yet together they can reveal the outline of a forgotten world. This is exactly how researchers have approached the mystery of Tar-Hanasa. The strongest clues do not come from buried ruins alone. They come from clay tablets written more than 3,000 years ago. The Hittites left behind one of the ancient world's richest collections of written records. Thousands of cuneiform tablets discovered at Hattusa preserve royal decrees, diplomatic correspondence, religious ceremonies, legal decisions, and military reports. These documents provide an unusually detailed picture of Hittite government, Occasionally they mention Tarhintasa, not as a legend, not as an uncertain destination, but as a living city playing an important role in imperial affairs. One royal document describes how King Muatali II relocated the royal court from Hattusa to Tarhintasa. Although historians continue debating his exact reasons, the move itself appears genuine. Such a decision would have transformed the city almost overnight. Officials responsible for taxation, diplomacy, religion, agriculture, and military administration would all require offices. Storage facilities would be needed for grain, weapons, and supplies. Temples would host major ceremonies honoring the empire's gods. Palaces would accommodate the royal household and visiting foreign envoys. Roads connecting the capital to surrounding provinces would become increasingly important. Tarhintasa was therefore not simply another settlement. It was expected to function as the administrative heart of a superpower. Yet there is something curious about the historical record. Later kings eventually returned the royal administration to Hattusa. Why? Again, certainty remains elusive. Some historians suggest that changing political conditions made Hattusa more practical. Others believe military threats shifted over time, altering the strategic importance of different regions. Environmental factors have also entered the discussion. Recent archaeological research increasingly recognizes that climate influenced ancient civilizations in profound ways. Periods of prolonged drought could reduce harvests, weaken economies, and encourage population movement. A city chosen during one generation might become less suitable only decades later. The Hittites depended heavily upon stable agricultural production. Water availability mattered enormously. If changing environmental conditions affected one region differently than another, relocating administrative centers may have reflected practical adaptation rather than political instability. This possibility has attracted growing attention among researchers. Evidence from lake sediments, pollen studies, and tree rings allows scientists to reconstruct ancient climates with surprising accuracy. Although these studies cannot identify Tarhintasa directly, they help explain why rulers sometimes made decisions that appear unusual from a modern perspective. Political history and environmental history often intersect in unexpected ways. The mystery deepens further when archaeologists examine candidate sites. Several locations across southern Turkey have been proposed over the years. Some contain monumental architecture dating to the correct period. Others reveal evidence of administrative importance. A few possess inscriptions mentioning rulers associated with Tarhantasa's broader region. Among the most frequently discussed sites is Turkmenkarahuyuk. In recent years, archaeological work there has generated considerable excitement. The settlement is enormous. Its size alone suggests that it once ranked among the largest Bronze Age cities in Anatolia. Researchers have uncovered impressive remains indicating long-term occupation and significant political influence. Perhaps even more intriguing was the discovery of a monumental inscription nearby referring to a powerful ruler whose authority extended across the surrounding landscape. Although this discovery did not conclusively identify the city as Tarhintasa, it dramatically renewed scholarly interest. Large settlements capable of serving as imperial capitals are relatively rare. Turkmenkarahuyuk therefore deserves careful investigation. Still, archaeology rarely moves from possibility to certainty overnight. One inscription can transform understanding. Equally, one missing piece of evidence can prevent definitive conclusions. Researchers continue excavating layer by layer, carefully documenting every structure, artifact, and fragment before drawing larger historical interpretations. That patience is essential. Ancient cities often experienced multiple periods of occupation. One civilization built upon another. Buildings were expanded, demolished, and rebuilt. A single location might preserve evidence spanning thousands of years. Separating one historical phase from another requires extraordinary attention to detail. This careful methodology distinguishes archaeology from treasure hunting. The goal is not merely to uncover impressive objects, it is to understand how ancient people actually lived. Daily life inside Tarhintasa must have been remarkably complex. Officials recorded taxes arriving from distant provinces. Craftsmen produced tools, pottery, and ceremonial objects. Merchants transported goods across trade networks stretching deep into the eastern Mediterranean. Farmers supplied food supporting thousands of residents. Religious festivals brought communities together within temple precincts. Children learned trades from their parents. Messengers traveled between cities carrying royal instructions. Like every great capital, Tarhuntasa depended upon countless ordinary people whose names history never recorded. Thinking about those forgotten lives changes the mystery itself. The search is no longer simply about locating buildings. It becomes an attempt to rediscover an entire community. Every excavated house contributes another piece of that story. Pottery reveals eating habits. Animal bones indicate diet. Plant remains identify cultivated crops. Tools illustrate craftsmanship. Even discarded rubbish becomes valuable evidence. History often survives in the most unexpected places. One broken storage jar may reveal trade connections extending hundreds of kilometers. A clay seal can identify government officials previously unknown. Fragments of imported pottery demonstrate relationships with neighboring civilizations. Small discoveries gradually illuminate much larger historical patterns. That is precisely why Tarhuntasa continues attracting international research teams. Finding the city would reshape understanding of Hittite political geography. It could clarify how the empire governed distant territories. It might explain previously confusing historical documents. Perhaps most exciting of all, it could preserve archives similar to those discovered at Hattusa. If administrative tablets survive beneath collapsed buildings, they might answer questions historians have debated for generations. Ancient archives possess extraordinary power. Unlike monuments celebrating royal achievements, administrative records often reveal ordinary realities. Correspondence between governors, requests for grain shipments, diplomatic negotiations, religious ceremonies, economic reports. Together, these documents reconstruct the rhythms of everyday government. The possibility that such records remain buried somewhere beneath the Anatolian landscape is one of archaeology's greatest sources of excitement. Every excavation season carries renewed hope, not necessarily for spectacular treasure, but for information. Sometimes a single clay tablet contributes more to historical knowledge than an entire room filled with precious metals. That principle guides modern archaeological research. Knowledge is the greatest discovery. And somewhere beneath the fields of Turkey, that knowledge may still be waiting quietly beneath layers of earth, preserved through thousands of years of silence. The true identity of Wallachia. There are places in history that disappear because they were destroyed. Others vanish because their people abandoned them. But some become mysteries for a very different reason. They remain hidden in plain sight, mentioned repeatedly in royal correspondence, celebrated in international trade, and treated as one of the most important kingdoms of the Bronze Age. Yet no one can say with complete certainty where they actually were. That is the mystery of Wallachia. More than 3,000 years ago, kings from Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and powerful rulers across the eastern Mediterranean exchanged letters with the ruler of Wallachia, as though its location needed no explanation. Ships carried valuable cargo from its ports. Diplomats negotiated alliances with its king. Merchants depended on its resources. It played a vital role in the international economy of the late Bronze Age. Then, over time, its identity faded. The name survived. The kingdom did not. Today, historians continue searching for the real Wallachia, piecing together evidence from ancient texts, archaeology, chemistry, and maritime trade. The investigation has become one of the Bronze Age's most fascinating historical puzzles, because solving it would reveal far more than the location of a single kingdom. It would reshape our understanding of how ancient civilizations connected across the Mediterranean. The story begins with a remarkable collection of diplomatic letters. During the 14th century BC, Egyptian pharaohs maintained correspondence with foreign rulers through clay tablets written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the age. These documents, discovered centuries later at Akhetaten, preserve conversations between some of the most influential leaders of the Bronze Age. Among the kings who wrote to Egypt was the ruler of Wallachia. The tone of these letters immediately attracts attention. Rather than speaking as a minor regional governor, the king of Wallachia addressed the pharaoh as an equal. Gifts were exchanged. Trade agreements were discussed. Political concerns were shared with remarkable familiarity. The letters reveal a relationship built on diplomacy rather than conquest. They also provide an important clue about Wallachia's wealth. Again and again, one resource appears: copper. The king frequently mentions shipments of copper sent to Egypt, sometimes apologizing when production had been reduced by local difficulties. These references are significant because copper was one of the essential materials of the Bronze Age. Bronze, the metal that gave the era its name, required copper mixed with tin. Without reliable copper supplies, armies could not equip soldiers effectively. Farmers lacked durable tools. Builders faced limitations. Entire economies depended upon steady production. This immediately raises an obvious question. Which region possessed enough copper to support international trade on such a scale? For generations, one answer has appeared more convincing than any other. Cyprus. The island sits in the eastern Mediterranean and contains some of the richest copper deposits in the region. Archaeological excavations have uncovered extensive evidence of Bronze Age mining, smelting, and overseas commerce. Enormous quantities of copper left the island during this period, reaching civilizations across the Mediterranean. The connection seems almost perfect, yet historians rarely accept attractive explanations without careful testing. Instead, they ask whether independent evidence supports the idea. Over the past several decades, scientific research has provided increasingly persuasive clues. One fascinating method involves isotope analysis. Every geological region possesses a unique chemical signature. Copper extracted from different mines contains subtle variations that scientists can measure with remarkable precision. By comparing the composition of ancient copper ingots with known mining regions, researchers can often identify their place of origin. Many Bronze Age copper ingots recovered from archaeological sites match Cypriot ore exceptionally well. This finding strengthens the argument that Cyprus served as one of the ancient world's principal copper exporters. Could Cyprus therefore be Alashiya? Many scholars believe so, yet the mystery is more complicated than simply matching copper deposits. Ancient kingdoms did not always correspond neatly with modern islands or political borders. Was Alashiya the entire island? A single kingdom occupying only part of Cyprus? A major coastal city controlling trade? Or perhaps a broader political network centered on Cypriot resources? Each possibility carries different historical implications. Archaeology adds further complexity. Bronze Age settlements across Cyprus reveal impressive urban centers connected through active maritime trade. Cities such as Enkami, Kalaphasos, and Elassa have all entered scholarly discussions because they display evidence of wealth, international contact, and administrative importance. Among these candidates, Enkomi has long attracted particular attention. Excavations there uncovered monumental architecture, imported luxury goods, writing systems, workshops, and enormous quantities of copper-related material. The city's prosperity clearly reflected participation in international commerce. For many years, researchers considered it a strong candidate for the capital of Alashiya. Others, however, argue that different sites fit the evidence more closely. The site of Elassa, whose modern name bears an intriguing resemblance to Alashiya, has also received considerable attention. Nearby excavations have revealed important Bronze Age remains, encouraging renewed debate about whether the kingdom's political center shifted over time. This possibility reminds us that ancient states were not static. Capitals sometimes moved. Trade routes evolved. Earthquakes, environmental change, and political developments reshaped entire regions. Expecting one permanent capital may oversimplify Bronze Age realities. One particularly revealing aspect of the diplomatic letters concerns the concern shared by the king himself. He refers to attacks from raiders and disruptions affecting trade. These comments place Alashiya within a wider Mediterranean world, experiencing growing instability during the closing centuries of the Bronze Age. Trade networks remained extensive, but they also became increasingly vulnerable. Merchant ships crossed great distances carrying copper, timber, glass, ivory, luxury goods, and diplomatic gifts. Their success depended upon secure ports and stable political relationships. When those networks weakened, the effects spread rapidly across multiple civilizations. This broader context helps explain why identifying Alashiya matters so much. The kingdom was not an isolated producer of copper. It functioned as one of the central hubs connecting Egypt, Anatolia, the Levant, and the Aegean. Understanding its role offers insight into how the entire Bronze Age economy operated. The famous Uluburun shipwreck illustrates this interconnected world beautifully. Discovered off the coast of modern Turkey, the ship carried an astonishing cargo representing cultures from across the eastern Mediterranean. Copper ingots formed a major portion of its load. Although the wreck does not solve the mystery of Wallachia directly, it demonstrates the extraordinary scale of international commerce during the Late Bronze Age. Goods, ideas, technologies, and diplomatic relationships crossed the sea with remarkable frequency. Modern archaeology continues adding new pieces to the puzzle. Remote sensing, underwater exploration, chemical analysis, and fresh excavations steadily improve understanding of Bronze Age Cyprus. Each discovery refines existing theories. Sometimes evidence strengthens long-held ideas. Occasionally, it challenges them completely. That careful willingness to revise conclusions defines responsible historical research. Rather than searching for simple answers, archaeologists assemble evidence patiently until a clearer picture begins to emerge. Today, many specialists consider Cyprus the strongest candidate for Wallachia. Yet important questions remain unanswered. Where exactly was its royal court? How was political authority organized? Did one city dominate the island, or did power shift between regional centers? The ancient letters remain frustratingly silent on those details. And so the mystery continues, not because historians lack evidence, but because the surviving evidence invites multiple interpretations. Perhaps that is what makes Wallachia such a compelling historical puzzle. It reminds us that even civilizations deeply connected to the ancient world can lose their identity over thousands of years. Names survive, letters survive, artifacts survive, but the precise geography of power can fade, leaving future generations to reconstruct it piece by careful piece. Until new discoveries provide more definitive answers, Wallachia will remain one of the Bronze Age's most intriguing kingdoms, a place known to kings across the ancient Mediterranean, yet still only partially understood by the modern world. Ahiyawa, the kingdom that may have inspired the legends of Greece. Imagine reading a diplomatic letter written more than 3,000 years ago and finding the name of a kingdom so powerful that even the mighty Hittite Empire treated its ruler as a political equal. The kingdom commanded influence across the Aegean Sea, appeared repeatedly in royal correspondence, and became involved in disputes over cities, trade, and alliances. Yet despite its apparent importance, historians still debate one fundamental question. What exactly was Ahiyawa? Unlike mythical kingdoms known only from legend, Ahiyawa appears in genuine Bronze Age documents. Hittite kings wrote about it, negotiated with its rulers, and sometimes viewed it as both a valuable partner and a formidable rival. The mystery lies not in whether Ahiyawa existed, but in identifying who its people really were. For many scholars, the answer may connect one of history's greatest civilizations with one of its greatest literary traditions. The story begins in the royal archives of the Hittite Empire. Over the past century, archaeologists excavating the ancient capital of Hattusa uncovered thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform. These texts preserved treaties, legal records, military reports, and diplomatic correspondence that revealed the political landscape of the Late Bronze Age in remarkable detail. Among these documents, one name appears repeatedly: Ahiyawa. Sometimes it is mentioned during discussions about Western Anatolia. At other times, Hittite kings describe negotiations involving rulers associated with Ahiyawa. Several texts even suggest that its king possessed enough influence to affect events hundreds of kilometers from his own homeland. This immediately raises an important question. Who could command such authority across the Aegean during the 13th century BC? One theory has become increasingly influential over the past several decades. Many historians believe Ahiyawa may refer to the Mycenaean Greeks. The similarity between the name Ahiyawa and the later Greek term Achaean has attracted scholarly attention for generations. In ancient Greek literature, particularly the epic poems traditionally attributed to Homer, the word Achaeans describes many of the Greek warriors who fought during the legendary Trojan War. Could the Hittite documents preserve the Bronze Age name of those same people? The possibility is fascinating. If correct, the Hittite archives would provide independent historical evidence for a powerful Mycenaean kingdom centuries before classical Greek civilization emerged. However, historians approach this idea carefully. Names can resemble one another by coincidence, and linguistic similarities alone rarely provide definitive proof. Instead, researchers compare language, archaeology, geography, diplomacy, and political history to determine whether the pieces fit together. Remarkably, many of them do. During the Late Bronze Age, the Mycenaean civilization flourished across mainland Greece and several Aegean islands. Magnificent palace centers such as Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and Thebes governed surrounding territories through highly organized administrative systems. Excavations have revealed impressive fortifications, elaborate royal residences, storerooms filled with valuable goods, and clay tablets written in the Linear B script. These discoveries demonstrate that the Mycenaean world possessed the political sophistication expected of a kingdom capable of communicating with the Hittites. Even more importantly, archaeological evidence shows that Mycenaean influence extended far beyond Greece itself. Mycenaean pottery has been discovered throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Luxury goods traveled between cultures. Merchants crossed the Aegean regularly. Diplomatic relationships connected distant courts. The seas served not as a barrier, but as a highway linking civilizations together. Against this backdrop, a powerful overseas kingdom interacting with Western Anatolia becomes entirely plausible. The Hittite texts provide additional clues. Several documents refer to disputes involving cities along the western coast of Anatolia, particularly a place known as Wilusa. That name may sound unfamiliar at first, yet many historians believe Wilusa corresponds linguistically to the later city known as Ilios, another ancient name for Troy. If this interpretation is correct, the implications become extraordinary. The Hittite records would place Ahiyawa within the political landscape surrounding one of history's most famous cities. Importantly, these documents do not describe legendary heroes or epic battles. Instead, they discuss diplomacy, alliances, local rulers, and political negotiations in the practical language of government administration. This distinction matters. The value of the Hittite tablets lies precisely in their ordinary nature. They were not written to entertain future generations. They recorded contemporary political affairs. One particularly famous document, often called the Tawagalawa letter, illustrates this relationship beautifully. Written by a Hittite king to the ruler of Ahiyawa, the letter addresses disagreements while maintaining a notably respectful tone. The language suggests communication between rulers of comparable status. Rather than treating Ahiyawa as a distant minor state, the correspondence implies recognition of considerable political importance. That level of diplomatic respect has become one of the strongest arguments supporting the identification of Ahiyawa with the Mycenaean world. Yet important uncertainties remain. Even if Ahiyawa represents the Mycenaean Greeks, what exactly was it? Did the name refer to all Mycenaean kingdoms collectively? One dominant palace? A loose alliance of rulers? Or perhaps only a particular region of Greece? The archaeological evidence cannot yet answer these questions completely. The political organization of Mycenaean Greece appears more complex than a single unified empire. Multiple palace centers exercised regional authority while sharing common cultural traditions. How those rulers cooperated internationally remains an active area of research. Archaeology continues adding valuable pieces to the puzzle. Excavations at Mycenaean sites reveal thriving centers of administration supported by agriculture, craftsmanship, and maritime trade. Storerooms contained olive oil, wine, grain, textiles, and bronze equipment. Workshops produced fine pottery and luxury objects. Palaces maintained detailed economic records using Linear B tablets. These discoveries demonstrate that the Mycenaean economy possessed both organization and scale. Ships connected Greece with Cyprus, Anatolia, Egypt, and the Levant. Ideas traveled alongside cargo. Artistic styles spread between cultures. Diplomatic marriages strengthened political relationships. The Bronze Age Mediterranean functioned as an interconnected world rather than a collection of isolated civilizations. Ahiyawa occupied an important place within that network. Interestingly, modern scientific techniques have strengthened these historical reconstructions. Chemical analysis identifies the origins of pottery and metals found at archaeological sites. Marine archaeology has uncovered shipwrecks carrying international cargoes. Satellite surveys reveal ancient landscapes hidden beneath modern terrain. Together, these methods confirm that extensive overseas interaction occurred during precisely the period described by the Hittite texts. The documents and archaeology increasingly reinforce one another. Still, responsible historians distinguish between strong evidence and absolute certainty. No surviving inscription states directly, Ahiyawa is Mycenaean Greece. Instead, researchers assemble multiple independent lines of evidence: linguistic similarities, geographical references, diplomatic correspondence, archaeological discoveries, trade patterns, political context. Each strengthens the overall interpretation. Collectively, they create a persuasive, though not universally accepted case. Perhaps the greatest significance of Ahiyawa lies in what it reveals about the Bronze Age itself. For centuries, people imagined ancient civilizations as largely isolated societies separated by distance. Modern archaeology paints a very different picture. Kings exchanged diplomatic letters across the sea. Merchants transported valuable cargo over hundreds of kilometers. Ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions moved between cultures with surprising frequency. Ahiyawa stands as a reminder that international politics flourished long before the classical world emerged. Whether it ultimately proves to be the Mycenaean Greeks or another closely related Aegean power, its story transforms our understanding of early European history. Rather than existing on the margins of civilization, the Aegean appears deeply integrated into one of the ancient world's most sophisticated diplomatic systems. That realization makes the mystery even more compelling. Every newly translated tablet, every archaeological excavation, and every scientific analysis brings historians one step closer to understanding the true identity of Ahiyawa. Yet the kingdom still guards part of its secret. Its people traded with empires, influenced regional politics, and earned the respect of powerful kings. Their names survived on clay tablets buried for millennia beneath the ruins of Hattusa. Only now are those forgotten voices beginning to tell their story again. Until new evidence settles the debate beyond doubt, Ahiyawa will remain one of the Bronze Age's most intriguing historical enigmas, a kingdom standing at the crossroads of archaeology, diplomacy, and the earliest chapters of Greek history. The vanished kingdom of Mitanni. Some mysteries begin with a missing city, others begin with a lost treasure, but a few are far more astonishing. They involve entire kingdoms that once rivaled the greatest powers of their age, before quietly disappearing from history. The kingdom of Mitanni is one of those mysteries. More than 3,000 years ago, Mitanni stood alongside Egypt, the Hittite Empire, Babylon, and Assyria as one of the dominant states of the ancient Near East. Its rulers negotiated royal marriages with pharaohs, controlled strategic trade routes, commanded skilled armies, and influenced politics across northern Mesopotamia and Syria. Then, almost as suddenly as it had risen, Mitanni faded from the historical record. Its royal dynasty disappeared. Its capital was forgotten. Its language survived only in fragments. For centuries, even the location of many of its cities remained unknown. Today, archaeologists continue searching for answers. Every excavation uncovers another piece of a kingdom that once shaped the Bronze Age but left surprisingly few traces behind. The story begins in a region that has always connected civilizations. Between the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers lay fertile plains crossed by merchants, diplomats, and armies for thousands of years. Whoever controlled this landscape also controlled important routes linking Anatolia, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and the Iranian plateau. It was an ideal location for a powerful kingdom to emerge. Sometime during the 16th century BC, Mitanni rose to prominence. Exactly how this happened remains one of the first mysteries surrounding the kingdom. Unlike Egypt or Babylon, whose histories stretch back through long sequences of written records, Mitanni appears more suddenly. Historians still debate the origins of its ruling elite and the process by which they established authority over the region. What is clear is that within only a few generations, Mitanni had become one of the strongest political powers in the Near East. Its influence reached far beyond its borders. The Egyptian pharaohs regarded Mitanni as an equal. Royal families exchanged gifts and diplomatic letters. Princesses from Mitanni married into the Egyptian royal household, strengthening alliances through family ties rather than warfare. These marriages appear repeatedly in diplomatic correspondence preserved in Egyptian records, offering remarkable insight into international politics during the Bronze Age. The letters reveal respect, negotiation, shared interests. They also remind us that ancient diplomacy often depended upon personal relationships between rulers. Mitanni was not merely surviving among larger neighbors, it was actively shaping regional affairs. One reason for its success may have been its military. Ancient sources frequently associate Mitanni with highly trained chariot warriors. During the Bronze Age, chariots represented some of the most advanced military technology available. Building them required specialized craftsmanship. Maintaining horses demanded considerable resources. Training skilled drivers and archers took years. Kingdoms capable of deploying effective chariot forces possessed a significant strategic advantage. Interestingly, one of the most famous documents connected to Mitanni concerns horses rather than kings. A Hittite text attributed to a horse trainer named Kikuli preserves detailed instructions for conditioning chariot horses. What makes this document remarkable is that several technical terms appear to reflect linguistic traditions associated with Mitanni's ruling class. This unusual combination of cultures has fascinated historians for decades. The majority of the kingdom's population likely spoke the Hurrian language, yet some royal names and specialized vocabulary display similarities with early Indo-Aryan languages. Why? Several theories have been proposed. One suggests that a relatively small warrior elite introduced certain traditions while governing a predominantly Hurrian population. Another argues that these linguistic similarities reflect broader cultural exchanges across Eurasia during the Bronze Age. The available evidence supports multiple interpretations, and historians continue examining this fascinating question. Whatever its origins, Mitanni developed into a remarkably sophisticated state. Its rulers administered fertile agricultural lands, managed trade routes, and maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring empires. Merchants transported metals, textiles, timber, horses, and luxury goods through territories controlled by the kingdom. Cities flourished. Temples welcomed worshippers. Craftsmen produced pottery, tools, and ceremonial objects. Like every great civilization, Mitanni depended upon thousands of ordinary people whose daily work sustained the state. Yet one enormous question remains unanswered. Where was its capital? Ancient texts identify the royal capital as Washukani. Despite generations of archaeological investigation, its precise location remains uncertain. Finding Washukani has become one of the greatest goals of Bronze Age archaeology. Historical records suggest it served as the political heart of the kingdom. Kings ruled from there. Diplomats visited its court. Important decisions affecting international politics were likely made within its palaces. If discovered, the city could contain archives comparable to those found at Hattusa or other great capitals. Clay tablets preserved beneath collapsed buildings might reveal treaties, administrative records, tax lists, religious ceremonies, and royal correspondence. Such discoveries could transform understanding of Mitanni almost overnight. Several archaeological sites have been proposed as possible locations. Each possesses characteristics consistent with a major Bronze Age settlement. Some contain monumental architecture. Others occupy strategically important river valleys. Still, no excavation has produced a decisive inscription identifying the site as Washukani. Without that confirmation, the mystery continues. Modern technology has greatly improved the search. Satellite imagery reveals buried settlement patterns invisible from ground level. Magnetometry detects ancient walls beneath cultivated fields. Ground-penetrating radar identifies hidden structures before excavation begins. These techniques allow archaeologists to investigate enormous landscapes more efficiently than ever before. Even so, ancient cities rarely surrender their identities easily. Natural erosion, later occupation, and changing river systems often obscure critical evidence. Another factor complicates the search. Many regions once belonging to Mitanni remain difficult to investigate because of modern political circumstances and limited archaeological access. As a result, some of the kingdom's most promising locations have not yet received the extensive excavations they deserve. Future research may dramatically change what historians know today. The disappearance of Mitanni presents another enduring mystery. Unlike civilizations destroyed by a single catastrophic event, Mitanni appears to have declined gradually under increasing external pressure. The Hittite Empire expanded from the northwest. Assyria grew stronger in the east. Political alliances shifted. Regional conflicts altered the balance of power. Over time, Mitanni's independence weakened. Eventually, Assyria absorbed much of its territory. The kingdom disappeared as a political entity. Yet disappearance did not mean complete extinction. Its people continued living in the region. Local traditions survived. Languages evolved. Communities adapted to new rulers. History often remembers the fall of kingdoms more dramatically than the continuity of ordinary life. Even after political borders changed, families still farmed fields, traded goods, raised children, and practiced long-established customs. Archaeology helps reveal those quieter stories. Excavations at settlements associated with Mitanni uncover houses, workshops, storage facilities, temples, and everyday objects that speak not only of kings, but of ordinary citizens. Pottery fragments reveal cooking habits. Animal bones indicate livestock management. Seeds preserved in ancient storage pits identify crops grown thousands of years ago. These seemingly modest discoveries allow historians to reconstruct the rhythms of daily life with surprising detail. Perhaps that is why the mystery of Mitanni remains so compelling. It combines royal diplomacy, military innovation, linguistic puzzles, and one of archaeology's greatest missing capitals. Every newly discovered inscription adds another sentence to a story interrupted more than 3 millennia ago. Every excavation improves understanding of a civilization once powerful enough to negotiate with pharaohs and emperors alike. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Where exactly was Washukani? How did Mitanni first emerge? Who composed its ruling elite? Why did its political influence decline so rapidly? And how much of its history still lies hidden beneath the plains of northern Mesopotamia? For now, the kingdom of Mitanni remains one of the Bronze Age's greatest historical enigmas, a civilization known through diplomacy, remembered through fragments, and still waiting for archaeology to uncover the chapters that time chose to hide. The fall of Ugarit, a city that saw the end coming. Imagine receiving a letter warning that danger is approaching. You know something terrible is happening beyond the horizon. Nearby kingdoms have stopped responding. Trade ships have disappeared. Allies are nowhere to be found. Yet before help can arrive, your entire civilization vanishes. This is not a legend. It is one of the most haunting moments preserved from the Bronze Age. The ancient city of Ugarit left behind something incredibly rare, a collection of final messages written just before its destruction. These letters capture a civilization standing at the edge of collapse, unaware that future generations would one day read its last desperate attempts to understand what was happening around it. Unlike many ancient mysteries, historians know exactly where Ugarit stood. Its impressive ruins lie near the modern Syrian coast, where archaeologists have uncovered palaces, temples, workshops, harbors, and thousands of clay tablets. The mystery is not where Ugarit was. The mystery is why such a prosperous city disappeared so suddenly. To understand that question, it helps to see Ugarit at the height of its success. During the late Bronze Age, Ugarit occupied one of the most valuable locations in the eastern Mediterranean. Positioned along the coast, it connected inland kingdoms with overseas merchants traveling between Egypt, Cyprus, Anatolia, the Aegean, and Mesopotamia. Its harbor welcomed ships carrying copper, tin, timber, glass, ivory, fine pottery, textiles, oils, and luxury goods from across the known world. Few cities were better connected. Merchants speaking different languages filled its streets. Royal officials negotiated trade agreements. Craftsmen transformed imported raw materials into finished products. Scribes carefully recorded commercial transactions on clay tablets. The city prospered because it stood at the center of an international network linking nearly every major civilization of the Bronze Age. Archaeological discoveries revealed just how sophisticated Ugarit had become. Its royal palace covered an enormous area and contained administrative offices, storerooms, courtyards, and residential quarters. Temples honored important regional deities. Workshops produced luxury goods for both local use and export. The city even developed one of history's earliest alphabetic writing systems. Unlike earlier scripts requiring hundreds of symbols, the Ugaritic alphabet used a much smaller set of characters while still being written in cuneiform style. This innovation made writing more efficient and represents one of the remarkable intellectual achievements of the ancient Near East. Thousands of tablets discovered within the city provide extraordinary insight into everyday life. Unlike monumental inscriptions celebrating kings, these records discuss ordinary matters: business contracts, tax collections, diplomatic correspondence, religious ceremonies, legal disputes, agricultural production. Together, they allow historians to reconstruct the rhythms of a thriving Bronze Age society with remarkable detail. Yet within only a short period, everything changed. The most remarkable evidence comes from letters written during the city's final days. One famous message, sent by the king of Ugarit to another ruler, describes an alarming situation. Enemy ships had been sighted. Military forces were absent elsewhere. The kingdom faced growing uncertainty. The tone is not dramatic or exaggerated. Instead, it reflects the practical concern of officials trying to respond to rapidly changing events. That realism makes the documents especially powerful. These were not stories written long afterward. They were contemporary records created by people living through the crisis itself. The letters raise immediate questions. Who were these enemies? Why was assistance unavailable? What larger events were unfolding across the eastern Mediterranean? For generations, one explanation dominated discussion: the so-called Sea Peoples. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions describe groups arriving by both land and sea during the closing years of the Bronze Age. Some scholars long believed these movements played a decisive role in the destruction of numerous coastal cities, including Ugarit. There is evidence that maritime raids occurred. Several settlements show destruction dating to roughly the same period. However, modern historians increasingly view the situation as far more complex. Rather than searching for a single cause, researchers now examine multiple overlapping factors. Climate change has become one important area of investigation. Scientific studies using pollen samples, lake sediments, and other environmental evidence suggest that parts of the eastern Mediterranean experienced prolonged drought during the centuries surrounding the Bronze Age collapse. Reduced rainfall could have lowered agricultural production. Food shortages might have encouraged migration. Economic systems dependent upon stable harvests became increasingly vulnerable. Even prosperous kingdoms struggled when crops repeatedly failed. Trade also appears to have become less reliable. Ugarit's prosperity depended heavily upon international commerce. Ships carried essential materials across the Mediterranean. Copper arrived from Cyprus. Tin traveled from distant regions. Luxury goods moved between royal courts. If shipping routes became disrupted, the consequences spread quickly. Bronze production slowed, markets weakened, political relationships deteriorated. The interconnected economy that had created prosperity also created vulnerability. One problem rarely remained isolated. Earthquakes present another possibility. The eastern Mediterranean sits within an active seismic region. Archaeological evidence suggests several cities experienced earthquake damage during this period. Some researchers propose that a sequence of earthquakes may have weakened urban centers already facing economic and political pressures. Although earthquakes alone cannot explain every aspect of the Bronze Age collapse, they may have contributed to broader instability. Political tensions further complicated matters. Major powers including Egypt, the Hittite Empire, Assyria, and regional kingdoms all competed for influence. Changing alliances altered long-established balances of power. As neighboring states encountered their own difficulties, diplomatic support became less dependable. The final letters from Ugarit hint at precisely this problem. Requests for assistance seem to have gone unanswered. Military resources were committed elsewhere. The city increasingly faced its challenges alone. Archaeology provides compelling evidence of the city's final chapter. Excavations reveal destruction layers dating to the end of the Late Bronze Age. Collapsed buildings, burned structures, and abandoned streets indicate that life changed rapidly. Yet what happened afterward is equally significant. Unlike many cities that recovered following earlier disasters, Ugarit was never rebuilt as the major international center it had once been. Its role within Mediterranean trade effectively ended. The silence that followed may be as important as the destruction itself. One reason historians continue studying Ugarit so intensely is the remarkable preservation of its archives. When buildings collapsed, many clay tablets were baked by intense heat. Ironically, this process hardened them, allowing thousands of documents to survive for more than 3,000 years. Without those tablets, much of Ugarit's history would have disappeared forever. Instead, archaeologists recovered one of the richest written collections from the Late Bronze Age. These documents continue transforming historical understanding. They reveal international diplomacy operating through regular correspondence. They demonstrate the complexity of ancient trade. They preserve religious traditions, myths, poetry, and legal systems. Perhaps most importantly, they show ordinary administrators confronting extraordinary uncertainty. Modern scientific techniques continue expanding what researchers can learn from the site. Chemical analysis identifies the origins of imported goods. Marine archaeology reconstructs ancient shipping routes. Environmental studies reveal changing climate conditions. Digital imaging helps scholars read damaged tablets once considered impossible to decipher. Each technological advance adds another layer to the story. Yet no single discovery has answered the central mystery. Why did Ugarit disappear while so many interconnected civilizations faced crisis at nearly the same moment? The growing consensus among historians avoids simple explanations. Instead of one catastrophic event, they increasingly describe a systems collapse. Environmental stress, disrupted trade, political instability, migration, natural disasters, and regional conflict may all have interacted simultaneously. Each weakened the larger network supporting Bronze Age civilization. Eventually, even prosperous cities like Ugarit could no longer withstand the combined pressures. This perspective changes how we understand history. Civilizations rarely collapse because of one cause alone. They become vulnerable when multiple challenges reinforce one another over time. Ugarit illustrates this process with unusual clarity, because its surviving letters allow us to witness uncertainty unfolding almost in real time. The city's final scribes could not know they were documenting the closing chapter of an entire age. They simply recorded the problems confronting their world. 3,000 years later, those records still speak. They remind us that history is not only preserved in monuments and palaces. Sometimes its most powerful voices come from ordinary documents written during extraordinary moments. The mystery of Ugarit's fall therefore extends beyond the destruction of one city. It marks the end of a world built upon diplomacy, commerce, and international cooperation across the eastern Mediterranean. Its disappearance signaled the close of the Bronze Age and the beginning of a very different chapter in human history. And although archaeologists continue uncovering new evidence from its streets and archives, the final answer remains just beyond reach, making the fall of Ugarit one of the most compelling and deeply human mysteries of the ancient world. The Uluburun shipwreck, the Bronze Age's greatest time capsule picture. A merchant ship setting sail across the eastern Mediterranean more than 30,300 years ago. Its wooden hull is packed with copper, precious glass, ivory, fine pottery, jewelry, exotic spices, and luxury goods collected from distant kingdoms. Every item on board represents a different culture, a different language, and a different corner of the ancient world. The ship never reached its destination. Instead, it disappeared beneath the sea, where it rested undisturbed for over 3,000 years. When modern divers finally discovered it, they uncovered what many archaeologists now consider one of the most extraordinary discoveries ever made beneath the ocean. The Uluburun shipwreck is not mysterious because it cannot be found. Its location is well known today. The true mystery lies in understanding the remarkable collection of objects it carried, and what those objects reveal about the hidden connections that linked the civilizations of the Bronze Age. The story begins in 1982. Off the southwestern coast of modern Turkey, a local sponge diver noticed something unusual beneath the clear blue waters of the Mediterranean. Scattered across the seabed were strange metal objects, unlike anything he had seen before. Archaeologists soon arrived to investigate. What they discovered exceeded every expectation. Resting on a steep underwater slope lay the remains of a late Bronze Age merchant vessel, dating to approximately the 14th century BC. Although the ship itself had largely decayed over time, its cargo remained astonishingly well preserved. It was as though the sea had sealed a moment of history inside a natural vault. Every object remained exactly where it had settled thousands of years earlier. Unlike ancient cities, where centuries of rebuilding often disturb archaeological evidence, a shipwreck freezes a single journey in time. It records one voyage, one cargo, one specific moment in history. That is why maritime archaeologists regard shipwrecks as some of the most valuable archaeological sites in the world. The cargo of the Uluburun ship immediately revealed something remarkable. Hundreds of copper ingots covered much of the seabed. Many possessed a distinctive shape, often called oxhide ingots, because their four extended corners resemble the hide of an animal stretched flat. These ingots represented an enormous quantity of raw copper, one of the essential materials required for producing bronze. Nearby lay smaller quantities of tin. Separately, these metals held limited value. Together, they created bronze, the defining material of an entire age. The presence of both copper and tin immediately suggested that this was no ordinary trading vessel. It carried the resources needed to supply kingdoms. Scientific analysis has since traced much of the copper to Cyprus, long recognized as one of the ancient Mediterranean's most important sources of the metal. The tin remains more difficult to identify with certainty. Several possible regions have been proposed, reflecting just how extensive Bronze Age trade networks may have been. Already, one important conclusion becomes clear: the cargo had not come from a single kingdom. It represented an international marketplace. As excavations continued, the diversity of the finds became even more astonishing. Glass ingots appeared in brilliant shades of cobalt blue, turquoise, and lavender. These colorful blocks served as raw material for skilled craftsmen who transformed them into luxury objects prized throughout the ancient world. Ivory from elephants and hippopotamuses suggested long-distance connections reaching deep into Africa and the Near East. Exotic woods, carefully carved boxes, jewelry made from gold, silver, and precious stones, fine pottery, and beautifully crafted weapons all emerged from beneath the sand. Every artifact told part of the story. Together they painted a picture of a Mediterranean world far more interconnected than many people once imagined. One of the most fascinating discoveries involved a small golden scarab bearing the name of an Egyptian queen. Objects like this help archaeologists estimate when the ship likely sailed. They also demonstrate the movement of royal gifts, diplomatic exchanges, and luxury goods between powerful kingdoms. The ship was not simply transporting commercial merchandise. It also carried items reflecting politics, prestige, and international relationships. Some artifacts originated in Egypt, others came from Cyprus. Still others reflected traditions associated with the Levant, Anatolia, Mycenaean Greece, or Mesopotamia. Few discoveries illustrate the global nature of the Bronze Age more vividly. The ship itself raises equally intriguing questions. Where had it departed? Where was it heading? Who owned such valuable cargo? Historians continue debating these issues because no surviving document describes the voyage directly. Instead, researchers reconstruct possibilities using archaeology, geography, and the distribution of the cargo. One theory suggests the vessel followed a trading route connecting ports across the eastern Mediterranean before continuing toward the Aegean. Another proposes that it formed part of a diplomatic exchange involving several royal courts. The available evidence supports multiple interpretations. That uncertainty keeps the mystery alive. Marine archaeology has transformed understanding of the wreck. Excavating beneath the sea presents challenges very different from those encountered on land. Divers worked slowly, often spending years documenting the position of every artifact before removing it. Each object was carefully mapped, photographed, and conserved after recovery. Even the smallest fragments received meticulous attention. This extraordinary patience preserved valuable information about how the cargo had originally been stored aboard the vessel. The arrangement of the goods tells archaeologists almost as much as the objects themselves. Heavy copper ingots formed the main cargo near the bottom of the ship. More delicate luxury goods occupied protected spaces. Personal belongings of the crew appeared in separate areas. Tools, anchors, food containers, and navigational equipment offered glimpses into daily life aboard a Bronze Age merchant ship. These ordinary items help humanize the voyage. Behind every cargo stood sailors, navigators, merchants, craftsmen, people who spent weeks or months crossing open water using knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Their names remain unknown, yet their possessions allow historians to imagine their routines with surprising clarity. Cooking vessels reveal meals prepared on board. Weights and balances demonstrate commercial transactions. Woodworking tools suggest repairs made during long voyages. Even discarded items contribute valuable evidence. The Uluburun ship also highlights an important truth about Bronze Age civilization. Its prosperity depended upon cooperation. Copper from Cyprus required tin from elsewhere. Luxury goods traveled through multiple ports. Kings exchanged gifts across vast distances. Merchants relied upon safe harbors and stable political relationships. The Mediterranean functioned as an enormous economic network. When one part weakened, others often felt the consequences. This interconnected world explains why historians pay such close attention to the centuries surrounding 1200 BC. Many kingdoms experienced disruption during this period. Trade routes changed, major cities declined, political systems transformed. Although the Uluburun ship predates much of this upheaval, it provides a snapshot of the sophisticated international economy that existed beforehand. Understanding what flourished helps explain what was later lost. Modern science continues extracting remarkable information from the wreck. Chemical analysis identifies the origins of metals, glass, and pottery. Microscopic examination reveals traces of food once carried aboard. Ancient wood preserved beneath the sea provides clues about shipbuilding techniques. Even pollen and plant remains help reconstruct environments encountered during the voyage. Technology continues expanding what archaeologists can learn from discoveries made decades earlier. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Uluburun shipwreck is that history often survives in unexpected places. Had the vessel completed its journey successfully, its cargo would have been unloaded, melted down, traded, or reused. Very little would have survived. Instead, a single accident preserved an entire chapter of human civilization beneath the sea. The wreck reminds us that archaeology is not only about temples, palaces, or royal tombs. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from ordinary journeys interrupted by chance. A merchant ship carrying commercial goods has revealed more about Bronze Age trade than almost any written record. Even today, researchers continue studying its cargo, asking new questions about the people who built the ship, organized its voyage, and connected civilizations across thousands of kilometers of open water. The Uluburun shipwreck therefore remains far more than an underwater archaeological site. It is a perfectly preserved snapshot of an age when the world's greatest kingdoms were already linked through commerce, diplomacy, craftsmanship, and exploration. Its cargo tells a story of cooperation, innovation, and extraordinary human ambition. A story that spent more than 3,000 years hidden beneath the Mediterranean, waiting for the sea to give it back. Akhetaten and the mystery of the abandoned city of Akhetaten. Imagine an emperor at the height of his power making a decision so extraordinary that it changes the course of an entire civilization. He turns away from centuries of religious tradition, orders the construction of a brand new capital in the middle of the desert, and asks thousands of people to leave their homes and begin again in a place that had never before been a city. Then, only a few years after his death, the capital is abandoned. Its temples fall silent. Its palaces are left empty. Its name is deliberately erased from monuments. For centuries, drifting sand hides what was once the center of royal power. This is the story of Akhetaten, one of the most unusual cities ever built in ancient Egypt, and the enduring mystery of why it rose so quickly, only to disappear almost as suddenly. Unlike many lost cities, Akhetaten has been found. Its ruins survive near the modern site of Amarna in central Egypt. Archaeologists have excavated its streets, homes, temples, workshops, and royal buildings in remarkable detail. Yet discovering the city solved only one mystery. It created many more. Why would one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs abandon the greatest religious traditions of his ancestors? Why establish an entirely new capital instead of ruling from established cities like Thebes or Memphis? And why did nearly everyone leave so soon after his reign ended? The answers begin with one remarkable individual. Before becoming known as Akhenaten, the young ruler was called Amenhotep IV. He inherited one of the wealthiest and most powerful kingdoms in the ancient world. Egypt enjoyed prosperity, international influence, and a stable administration that had developed over many centuries. Its temples stood at the heart of society. Priests managed religious ceremonies. Monuments honored numerous gods whose worship shaped nearly every aspect of daily life. For generations, this system had remained remarkably successful. Then, something changed. Early in his reign, Amenhotep IV introduced dramatic religious reforms centered on the worship of Aten, represented by the visible disk of the sun. Over time, the king adopted a new royal name, Akhetaten. The change signaled far more than personal preference. It reflected a transformation that reached into religion, politics, art, and the organization of Egyptian society itself. Most remarkable of all was his decision to found a completely new capital. Rather than expanding an existing city, Akhenaten selected an undeveloped stretch of desert along the eastern bank of the Nile. Boundary stelae carved into surrounding cliffs declared this land sacred and dedicated to Aten. Construction began on an extraordinary scale. Within only a few years, workers built palaces, enormous temples, government offices, residential districts, workshops, gardens, roads, and housing for thousands of inhabitants. The city became known as Akhetaten, meaning the horizon of Aten. Its speed of construction continues to impress archaeologists today, although many buildings relied upon relatively small limestone blocks that allowed faster construction than traditional monumental architecture. Organizing such an enormous project still required careful planning. Quarries supplied building stone, officials coordinated labor, craftsmen decorated temples and palaces, administrators established government offices, families relocated from older cities. A functioning capital emerged where almost nothing had existed before. Excavations reveal a surprisingly well-planned urban landscape. Broad ceremonial avenues connected important districts. The great temple of Aten stood open to sunlight, reflecting the central importance of the solar deity within Akhenaten's religious vision. Royal residences overlooked carefully designed gardens and pools. Administrative buildings handled the daily business of government. Beyond the official districts stretched neighborhoods where ordinary people lived and worked. These residential areas have become especially valuable for archaeologists. Unlike many Egyptian cities that remained occupied for centuries, Akhetaten existed for only a relatively short period. Its brief lifespan preserved an unusually clear archaeological snapshot of one generation. Excavations uncover workshops producing jewelry, pottery, sculptures, textiles, and glass. Kitchen remains reveal everyday meals. Storage jars preserve traces of agricultural products. Household objects illustrate ordinary family life. Together, these discoveries transform Akhetaten from a royal monument into a living community. Yet despite this remarkable preservation, the city's greatest mystery remains its purpose. Why leave Thebes? Historians continue debating this question. One explanation focuses on religion. By establishing a completely new capital, Akhenaten created a ceremonial center devoted entirely to Aten, free from the traditions associated with older temples and priesthoods. Another interpretation emphasizes politics. The great temple institutions of Egypt possessed considerable wealth and influence. Relocating the royal court may have reduced their direct involvement in government while strengthening the pharaoh's own authority. Others argue that both religious and political motives worked together. The surviving evidence supports multiple possibilities. What makes the mystery particularly fascinating is how thoroughly Akhenaten transformed Egyptian artistic expression. Traditional royal portraits emphasized timeless perfection. During the Amarna period, artists adopted a strikingly different style. Members of the royal family appeared with elongated features, graceful poses, and intimate domestic scenes rarely seen in earlier Egyptian art. Akhenaten, Queen Nefertiti, and their daughters were shown beneath the rays of Aten sharing moments of family life. Historians continue discussing whether these images represented symbolic religious ideas, artistic innovation, or realistic portraiture. Whatever the explanation, the visual language of Egyptian art changed dramatically during this brief period. The city's diplomatic archives provide another remarkable window into its world. Hundreds of clay tablets discovered at Amarna preserve correspondence between the Egyptian court and rulers across the Near East. Written primarily in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the Bronze Age, these letters discuss alliances, trade, marriages, military concerns, and requests for assistance. They reveal that even while pursuing sweeping religious reforms, Egypt remained deeply connected to international politics. Foreign kings addressed Akhenaten respectfully. Merchants continued exchanging valuable goods. Diplomatic relationships extended across thousands of kilometers. The world beyond Egypt never disappeared. Then, almost as suddenly as Akhetaten had risen, everything changed. After Akhenaten's reign ended, the city began to lose its central role. His successors gradually restored traditional religious practices. Government administration returned to older political centers. Temples once again honored the wider Egyptian pantheon. Within only a short time, Akhetaten stood largely abandoned. Buildings deteriorated. Stone blocks were reused in later construction projects elsewhere in Egypt. Over succeeding centuries, wind-blown sand slowly buried large sections of the city. Perhaps the most intriguing mystery is why later generations attempted to erase Akhenaten's memory. His name disappeared from many official king lists. Monuments were dismantled. Statues were broken or reworked. Future rulers appeared to have regarded his reign as an unwelcome departure from established tradition. Yet complete erasure proved impossible. The desert preserved what political memory sought to forget. When archaeologists began excavating Amarna in the 19th century, they uncovered one of the most informative urban sites in ancient Egypt. Every excavation season adds new details. Advanced imaging techniques reveal building layouts with increasing precision. Bioarchaeological studies examine the lives of ordinary residents. Chemical analysis identifies imported materials reaching the city through international trade. Digital reconstruction allows researchers to visualize streets and monuments, long since reduced to ruins. Each discovery enriches understanding while raising fresh questions. Was Akhenaten motivated primarily by sincere religious conviction? Did political strategy influence his reforms? How did ordinary Egyptians respond to such dramatic changes? To what extent did life within Akhetaten differ from older cities? Many of these questions remain open because archaeology rarely provides complete answers. Instead, it offers fragments requiring careful interpretation. Perhaps that is why Akhetaten continues to fascinate historians. Unlike legendary lost cities, its ruins can be visited, its streets have been mapped, its houses excavated, its archives translated. Yet the deeper motivations behind its creation and abandonment remain among the most compelling mysteries of ancient Egypt. The city reminds us that history is not shaped only by battles or conquests. Sometimes a single ruler's vision can transform an entire civilization. Whether viewed as a bold religious experiment, a political revolution, or both, Akhetaten stands as one of humanity's most remarkable urban projects. A city born from extraordinary ambition, abandoned within a single generation, and rediscovered only after centuries of silence beneath the Egyptian desert. The lost land of Punt, Egypt's greatest trading mystery. Imagine reading an ancient inscription that describes a distant land overflowing with fragrant trees, rare animals, precious metals, exotic woods, and valuable resins. Ships returned from this place carrying treasures unlike anything found in Egypt itself. Pharaohs celebrated successful expeditions with elaborate carvings, proudly recording every remarkable item that had been brought home. Yet there is one extraordinary problem. No one knows exactly where that land was. For more than 3,000 years, the true location of Punt has remained one of the greatest geographical mysteries of the ancient world. Egyptian rulers spoke of it with confidence. Artists carved detailed scenes showing its landscapes and its people. Royal expeditions sailed there repeatedly over many centuries. And then, almost without explanation, Punt disappeared from history. Today, archaeologists, historians, geologists, linguists, and even genetic researchers continue searching for clues. The mystery is no longer whether Punt existed. Ancient Egyptian records leave little doubt that it did. The real challenge is discovering where this remarkable trading partner was located and why its identity eventually faded from memory. The story begins during Egypt's Middle and New Kingdoms, when maritime trade became increasingly important. Egypt possessed abundant agricultural wealth along the Nile, but many luxury materials had to be obtained from distant regions. Temples required incense for religious ceremonies. Royal workshops sought ivory, ebony, gold, and rare animal skins. Craftsmen valued exotic woods that could not grow in Egypt's climate. Somewhere beyond the southern horizon lay a land capable of providing all of these resources. The Egyptians called it Punt. Unlike conquered territories, Punt was generally portrayed as a friendly trading partner. Royal inscriptions emphasize exchange rather than conflict. Ships arrived carrying gifts and returned loaded with valuable cargo. This peaceful relationship distinguishes Punt from many neighboring kingdoms that frequently appeared in military campaigns. Perhaps the most famous record comes from the reign of Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Inside her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, enormous reliefs depict an expedition sent across the Red Sea to Punt. These carvings remain among the most detailed visual records of long-distance trade from the ancient world. They show Egyptian ships arriving along a foreign coastline. Local leaders greet the visitors. Merchants carefully unload goods. Workers transport incense trees with their roots intact, apparently intending to replant them in Egyptian soil. Artists also illustrated houses raised on wooden stilts, surrounded by palm trees and rugged hills. Monkeys climb through the landscape. Exotic birds appear among the vegetation. Every detail has become valuable evidence for modern researchers. Unlike symbolic religious artwork, these reliefs seem intended to record a genuine expedition. Yet interpreting them is not straightforward. Ancient artists often combined realistic observation with traditional artistic conventions. Some features may accurately represent the landscape. Others may emphasize the wealth and uniqueness of the destination. Even so, the reliefs provide remarkable clues. The environment appears warmer than Egypt. The coastline suggests access by sea. The vegetation differs noticeably from the Nile Valley. The cargo itself tells an equally important story. Among the most prized imports was frankincense. This aromatic resin played a central role in Egyptian religious ceremonies, where it was burned as incense inside temples dedicated to the gods. The expedition also returned with myrrh, another fragrant resin valued for ritual, medicine, and perfume. In addition, Egyptian records describe ebony, ivory, gold, animal skins, ostrich feathers, and living animals including baboons and other exotic species. Each item offers another clue. Where could all of these resources have been gathered? For generations, scholars proposed several possible locations. One theory places Punt along the coast of modern Eritrea and northeastern Ethiopia. Supporters point to similarities between the landscape shown in Egyptian reliefs and the geography of the Horn of Africa. The region also possessed many of the natural resources described in ancient inscriptions, including frankincense-producing trees and valuable trade goods. Another theory extends the search farther south along the African coast, suggesting that Egyptian expeditions reached areas within modern Somalia. This region likewise produced aromatic resins and maintained ancient maritime connections across the Red Sea. Others have argued that parts of western Arabia deserve consideration. Ancient seafaring across the Red Sea connected both African and Arabian coastlines. Similar products could be obtained from several regions, making it possible that Punt represented a broader trading network rather than one narrowly defined kingdom. The debate has continued for decades because no single piece of evidence provides a complete answer. Instead, researchers combine multiple fields of study. Archaeology offers one line of investigation. Excavations along the Red Sea coast have uncovered ancient Egyptian ports that appear to have supported overseas expeditions. Warehouses, anchors, rope fragments, storage jars, and administrative inscriptions demonstrate that organized maritime voyages took place much earlier than once believed. These discoveries confirm that Egyptian sailors possessed both the technology and the experience necessary to undertake long-distance sea travel. The voyages themselves must have required careful planning. Ships had to be constructed using timber imported from distant regions. Fresh water and food needed to be stored for the journey. Navigators depended upon winds, currents, and generations of accumulated maritime knowledge. Crossing the Red Sea was no simple undertaking. Every successful expedition reflected remarkable organizational skill. Scientific research has added another fascinating dimension to the mystery. One unexpected source of evidence comes from baboons. Several Egyptian temples preserved mummified baboons imported from foreign lands. Modern scientists have analyzed chemical signatures preserved within their remains, comparing them with environmental patterns found across northeastern Africa and Arabia. Although the results remain open to interpretation, many studies suggest origins consistent with the Horn of Africa. This evidence does not solve the mystery by itself. However, it strengthens the argument that Egyptian expeditions reached regions along Africa's northeastern coastline. Botanical research provides additional clues. The frankincense and myrrh prized by Egyptian temples naturally grow in relatively limited areas. Mapping the historical distribution of these trees helps narrow the list of possible locations. Again, the Horn of Africa consistently appears as a strong candidate. Yet historians remain cautious. Trade goods often move through several intermediaries before reaching their final destination. A product exported from Punt may originally have come from an even more distant region. The kingdom itself may have functioned as a commercial hub connecting multiple cultures. This possibility helps explain another puzzle. Egyptian records describe Punt almost as though it were both a place and a trading partner. Perhaps it represented a coastal kingdom controlling access to wider regional networks. Perhaps its merchants gathered products from neighboring communities before exchanging them with Egyptian expeditions. If so, identifying one precise location becomes even more challenging. The mystery deepens when we consider what happened afterward. For many centuries, Egypt maintained contact with Punt. Then the references gradually disappear. Did trade routes shift? Did political changes interrupt maritime travel? Did the kingdom itself decline? Or did later civilizations simply know it by a different name? The historical record provides no definitive explanation. Archaeologists therefore continue searching for ports, settlements, inscriptions, and material evidence that might connect Egyptian records with specific locations. Every excavation along the Red Sea coast offers new possibilities. Underwater archaeology investigates ancient anchorages. Satellite imagery identifies buried caravan routes linking coastal settlements with inland regions. Chemical analysis traces the origins of imported materials. Together, these methods slowly refine our understanding. Perhaps the greatest significance of Punt lies not in its exact coordinates, but in what it reveals about the Bronze Age world. For many years, ancient Egypt was imagined as a civilization largely centered upon the Nile. The story of Punt tells a different tale. Egyptian sailors crossed open seas, diplomatic relationships extended beyond familiar borders. Luxury goods traveled across vast distances. Ideas, technologies, and commerce linked societies separated by hundreds of kilometers. The world was already remarkably interconnected. Even today, the search for Punt continues to inspire new discoveries. Every inscription, every archaeological survey, and every scientific analysis brings historians one step closer to identifying the kingdom that supplied Egypt with some of its most treasured resources. Yet the complete answer remains elusive. Perhaps somewhere beneath coastal sands, hidden within an unexplored harbor, or preserved beneath centuries of sediment, lies the evidence that will finally reveal the true location of Punt. Until then, the land of Punt remains one of history's most captivating geographical mysteries. A place known intimately by the pharaohs, celebrated in monumental art, enriched by peaceful exchange, and then gradually lost to time, leaving only its name and the enduring promise of discovery. The Bronze Age collapse. Why did an entire world fall apart? History is filled with the rise and fall of kingdoms. Empires expand, rulers change, and cities are rebuilt. But every so often, something much larger happens. Entire civilizations begin to fail at nearly the same time. Trade disappears. Great capitals are abandoned. Writing systems vanish. Prosperous cities fall silent, and for centuries afterward, people struggle to remember what came before. Around 1200 BC, this is exactly what happened across much of the eastern Mediterranean. Within only a few generations, some of the greatest civilizations of the Bronze Age entered a period of dramatic transformation. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece declined. The Hittite Empire disappeared as a political power. Important coastal cities, such as Ugarit, were destroyed or abandoned. Long-distance trade weakened, and many carefully organized political systems simply ceased to function. For more than a century, historians have asked one enormous question: what caused the Bronze Age collapse? The mystery is remarkable because no single explanation has ever satisfied all the evidence. Instead, archaeologists have uncovered clues pointing toward climate change, earthquakes, economic instability, political conflict, migration, and technological change. Each theory explains part of the story, yet none appears capable of explaining everything on its own. To understand why this event continues to fascinate researchers, it helps to imagine the Bronze Age world before the collapse began. Far from being isolated kingdoms, the civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean formed a vast international network. Egypt exchanged gifts with foreign rulers. The Hittites negotiated treaties across Anatolia and Syria. Merchants sailed between Cyprus, the Levant, Crete, mainland Greece, and Mesopotamia, carrying copper, tin, timber, ivory, textiles, glass, oils, perfumes, and luxury goods. Royal courts communicated through diplomatic letters written in Akkadian, the international language of the period. A merchant leaving Cyprus might unload copper in one port, receive luxury goods from another kingdom, and continue toward the Aegean, carrying cargo that originated hundreds of kilometers away. The system was remarkably sophisticated, yet it also depended upon stability. Every kingdom relied upon the others. Copper required tin to produce bronze. Merchant ships required secure harbors. Kings depended upon diplomatic alliances. Cities depended upon reliable harvests. If one part of the network weakened, the effects could spread surprisingly quickly. For many years, historians searched for one dramatic event that could explain the collapse. One popular theory focused on the mysterious Sea Peoples. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions describe groups arriving by land and sea during the reigns of several pharaohs. These inscriptions celebrate Egyptian victories while describing large movements of people across the eastern Mediterranean. Early historians often imagine the Sea Peoples as the primary cause of the collapse. According to this interpretation, waves of maritime raiders attacked prosperous coastal cities, disrupting trade and destroying kingdoms. The idea captured public imagination because it appeared to offer a simple explanation for a complex historical problem. However, archaeology gradually revealed a more complicated picture. While there is convincing evidence that population movements and attacks occurred in some regions, many inland cities also experienced decline. Some settlements show no signs of military destruction at all. Others were abandoned gradually rather than suddenly. Increasingly, researchers concluded that the Sea Peoples represented only one part of a much larger story. Attention then shifted toward the environment. Recent scientific studies have transformed how historians investigate ancient climate. By examining lake sediments, cave formations, pollen grains, tree rings, and marine deposits, researchers can reconstruct rainfall patterns from thousands of years ago. Several studies suggest that parts of the eastern Mediterranean experienced prolonged periods of drought during the centuries surrounding the Bronze Age collapse. Reduced rainfall would have affected agriculture directly. Harvests became less reliable. Food supplies declined. Livestock suffered. Communities already dependent upon successful harvests found themselves facing increasing pressure. A drought lasting only a few years presents difficulties. A drought extending across decades can reshape entire civilizations. Food shortages rarely remain isolated problems. When harvests fail, governments collect fewer taxes. Trade declines. Migration increases. Political unrest becomes more likely. Neighboring kingdoms compete for limited resources. The environmental evidence therefore provides an important piece of the puzzle. Yet climate alone does not explain everything. Many societies have survived difficult environmental conditions through adaptation. Researchers therefore began examining economic factors. The Bronze Age economy relied heavily upon long-distance trade. Unlike later periods, bronze production required two separate metals. Copper was relatively abundant in places such as Cyprus. Tin was much rarer. Obtaining sufficient supplies required extensive commercial networks stretching across enormous distances. If maritime trade became unreliable, bronze production slowed. Weapons became harder to manufacture. Agricultural tools became more difficult to replace. Construction projects suffered. The economic consequences spread throughout society. Archaeological discoveries support this interpretation. Several important ports show declining activity during the closing years of the Bronze Age. Imported goods become less common. Luxury items disappear from some regions. Commercial connections appear increasingly fragile. Rather than collapsing overnight, the trading system may have gradually unraveled. Political instability created additional challenges. The great powers of the Bronze Age maintained complicated diplomatic relationships. Egypt balanced its interests against the Hittites. Regional kingdoms negotiated shifting alliances. Marriage agreements strengthened political partnerships. Trade agreements reinforced economic cooperation. When one major kingdom encountered difficulties, neighboring states often felt the effects. The disappearance of a single ally could alter the balance across an entire region. The Hittite Empire illustrates this vulnerability. Once among the strongest powers of the ancient Near East, it eventually lost control over many of its territories. Its capital, Hattusa, was abandoned. Administrative systems weakened. Regional authority fragmented. The disappearance of such a powerful kingdom inevitably affected surrounding states. Meanwhile, the Mycenaean palace centers of Greece experienced their own transformations. Excavations revealed destruction at several important sites. Large administrative complexes ceased operating. The linear B writing system largely disappeared after the collapse of palace administration. For centuries afterward, written records became extremely rare in Greece. Historians often refer to this period as the Greek Dark Age, not because people vanished, but because surviving written evidence became much more limited. Another theory considers the role of earthquakes. The eastern Mediterranean lies within one of the world's most active seismic regions. Some archaeologists have proposed that repeated earthquakes damaged cities across a wide area within a relatively short period. Collapsed buildings, weakened infrastructure, and disrupted economies may have contributed to broader instability. Although earthquakes almost certainly occurred, most researchers now view them as one contributing factor rather than the sole cause. Perhaps the most persuasive modern explanation combines all of these ideas into what historians call a systems collapse. Imagine a highly interconnected world where every kingdom depends upon stable trade, successful agriculture, reliable diplomacy, and functioning governments. Now imagine multiple pressures appearing at nearly the same time. Drought reduces harvests, trade becomes unreliable, political alliances weaken, migration increases, natural disasters damage infrastructure, economic confidence declines. None of these problems alone destroys civilization. Together, however, they reinforce one another until recovery becomes increasingly difficult. This model explains why different regions experience different outcomes. Some cities recovered, others declined permanently. Some kingdoms survived in reduced form, others disappeared altogether. The collapse was not one event, it was a prolonged process unfolding across several generations. Modern archaeology continues refining this understanding. Satellite imagery identifies abandoned settlements. Chemical analysis traces changing trade patterns. Ancient DNA reveals population movements. Environmental science reconstructs past climates with increasing precision. Each discipline contributes another layer to the story. Remarkably, every new discovery seems to reinforce one central conclusion. The Bronze Age world was far more interconnected than historians once imagined. Its greatest strength became one of its greatest vulnerabilities. When the network flourished, prosperity spread widely. When the network weakened, difficulties spread just as quickly. Perhaps that is why the Bronze Age collapse continues to resonate today. It reminds us that civilizations are not defined solely by their monuments or armies. They also depend upon cooperation, communication, trade, and the ability to adapt when circumstances change. The collapse marked the end of one extraordinary chapter in human history, yet it also created opportunities for new societies to emerge. The ancient world did not end. It changed. New kingdoms rose. New technologies appeared. Fresh political systems developed from the foundations left behind. Even now, more than 3,000 years later, historians continue searching for the precise balance of factors that transformed the Bronze Age world. The mystery remains unsolved, not because evidence is lacking, but because the evidence reveals a story more intricate than anyone once imagined. Rather than one dramatic catastrophe, archaeology points toward a civilization challenged from many directions at once. A reminder that history's greatest turning points are often shaped not by a single cause, but by the combined weight of many interconnected events. The fall of the Minoan civilization, the mystery that changed the ancient world. Imagine walking through a magnificent palace filled with colorful frescoes, elegant courtyards, sophisticated drainage systems, and storerooms overflowing with olive oil, wine, grain, and fine pottery. Merchant ships arrive daily from distant ports across the Mediterranean. Craftsmen produce beautiful works of art, while scribes carefully record supplies using a writing system that remains undeciphered even today. This was the world of the Minoans. Long before the rise of classical Greece, the island of Crete was home to one of Europe's first great civilizations. For centuries, the Minoans dominated maritime trade across the eastern Mediterranean, building prosperous cities, remarkable palaces, and a culture whose influence reached Egypt, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Levant. Then something changed. Within only a few generations, this flourishing civilization entered a period of decline. Some of its greatest palaces were abandoned or destroyed, political authority shifted, and eventually another civilization emerged to dominate the Aegean. For more than a century, archaeologists have debated one of the Bronze Age's greatest mysteries: what happened to the Minoans? Unlike many ancient civilizations that disappeared completely, the Minoans left behind extraordinary archaeological evidence. Their cities have been excavated, their artwork survives in remarkable condition, their trade goods have been discovered across the Mediterranean. Yet despite all this evidence, historians still disagree about exactly why their civilization declined. The story begins on the island of Crete. Situated at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, Crete occupied one of the most strategic locations in the ancient Mediterranean. Ships traveling between Egypt, the Near East, mainland Greece, and western Mediterranean ports frequently passed nearby. The Minoans recognized this advantage. Rather than building a military empire through conquest, they appear to have developed their influence primarily through commerce, craftsmanship, and maritime connections. Archaeological excavations reveal an astonishing level of sophistication. The Palace of Knossos remains the best-known example. Covering several acres, it contains ceremonial halls, workshops, storerooms, residential quarters, administrative offices, and elaborate architectural features that impressed even early excavators. Bright frescoes decorated the walls with scenes of nature, ceremonies, marine life, and athletic competitions. Advanced drainage systems carried water throughout parts of the complex. Large storage magazines contained enormous clay jars capable of holding oil, grain, and wine. The palace functioned as far more than a royal residence. It served as an administrative, religious, and economic center supporting much of the surrounding region. Nor was Knossos unique. Other major palace centers appeared across Crete, including Paistos, Malea, and Zakros. Each played an important role within the island's political and economic network. Together they formed one of the most advanced civilizations of the Bronze Age. Trade connected the Minoans with nearly every major power of their time. Pottery from Crete has been discovered in Egypt, Cyprus, the Levant, and mainland Greece. Likewise, imported materials reach Crete from distant regions: ivory, gold, copper, tin, precious stones. Luxury goods flowed across the sea in both directions. This extensive commercial network brought prosperity for centuries. The Minoans also developed a distinctive writing system known today as Linear A. Although hundreds of inscriptions survive, the script has never been successfully deciphered. This remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. Without understanding these texts, historians lack direct access to the Minoans' own historical records, religious beliefs, administrative practices, and literature. Their voices remain largely silent. Everything researchers know must therefore come from archaeology rather than written history. One event has dominated discussions of the civilization's decline more than any other: the eruption of Thera. Today known as Santorini, the volcanic island lies north of Crete in the Aegean Sea. Sometime during the late Bronze Age, one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history transformed the island dramatically. Ash rose high into the atmosphere. Entire settlements were buried beneath volcanic deposits. The eruption preserved the remarkable town of Akhetaten in a manner often compared with Pompeii, offering archaeologists an extraordinary snapshot of Bronze Age life. Naturally, historians wondered whether this catastrophe also destroyed the Minoan civilization. At first glance, the theory seems convincing. A massive volcanic eruption could generate earthquakes, ashfall, and tsunamis capable of affecting nearby coastlines. Crete lies close enough that such events would almost certainly have been felt. Marine trade may have suffered significant disruption. Coastal settlements could have experienced serious damage. Yet archaeology tells a more complicated story. Excavations indicate that many Minoan centers continued functioning after the eruption. Life did not immediately come to an end. Construction continued, trade persisted, communities adapted. The eruption undoubtedly affected the region, but most researchers no longer believe it alone explains the eventual decline of Minoan civilization. Instead, attention shifts toward the decades that followed. Environmental disruption may have weakened agriculture. Economic networks became more fragile. Political authority may have faced increasing challenges. At the same time, another civilization was rising across the Aegean, the Mycenaeans. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mycenaean influence on Crete increased significantly during the later stages of Minoan history. Eventually, Linear BA script used by the Mycenaeans replaced Linear A within administrative contexts at Knossos. This change is highly significant. It indicates not merely cultural exchange, but a transformation in political administration. Exactly how this occurred remains uncertain. Some historians suggest peaceful integration through growing influence and trade. Others propose political domination following periods of instability. The available evidence supports multiple interpretations. Again, archaeology encourages caution rather than simple conclusions. Natural disasters may have contributed. Earthquakes frequently affected the eastern Mediterranean. Several palace complexes show evidence of seismic damage. Some buildings were repaired, others were rebuilt. Repeated earthquakes could gradually weaken political and economic systems already facing other pressures. Climate also enters the discussion. Environmental studies indicate that weather patterns across parts of the eastern Mediterranean became less predictable during the closing centuries of the Bronze Age. Agricultural difficulties would have affected food production, taxation, and social stability. Trade disruptions further complicated matters. The prosperity of Crete depended heavily upon maritime commerce. If shipping routes became less reliable, palace economies would struggle to maintain previous levels of wealth and organization. Each challenge reinforced the next. Archaeologists increasingly describe the decline as a process rather than a single catastrophe. One event alone rarely explains the transformation of an entire civilization. Instead, multiple pressures accumulated over generations. Natural disasters, changing trade, political competition, economic adjustment, environmental stress, foreign influence. Together, they gradually reshaped Minoan society. One fascinating aspect of the mystery lies in what survived. Minoan artistic traditions influenced neighboring civilizations long after political authority changed. Architectural techniques spread across the Aegean. Religious symbols continued appearing in later contexts. Maritime knowledge remained valuable. Rather than disappearing completely, many elements of Minoan culture evolve within new political systems. This continuity reminds historians that civilizations rarely vanish overnight. People adapt. Communities change. Traditions survive in unexpected ways. Modern archaeology continues expanding our understanding. Ground-penetrating radar identifies buried structures without excavation. Chemical analysis traces imported materials across Mediterranean trade networks. Digital reconstruction allows researchers to visualize palace complexes with remarkable accuracy. Environmental science reconstructs ancient landscapes and climate patterns. Even attempts to decipher Linear A continue using advanced computational methods. Every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. Yet one central question remains unresolved. Why did one of Europe's earliest great civilizations surrender its dominant position? Perhaps the answer lies not in one dramatic event, but in the interaction of many. The Minoans built a society deeply connected to the wider Mediterranean world. That interconnectedness brought prosperity. It also created vulnerability. When trade shifted, environments changed, and political balances evolved, even a remarkably successful civilization faced enormous challenges. The story of the Minoans therefore represents more than the mystery of one island. It reflects the fragile balance upon which complex societies often depend. Their magnificent palaces, vibrant art, advanced engineering, and international commerce transformed the ancient world. Although their political power eventually faded, their achievements continued influencing later civilizations for centuries. Today, visitors walking through the ruins of Knossos still encounter echoes of that remarkable society. Bright frescoes, elegant architecture, and carefully planned courtyards remind us that the Minoans were pioneers of the Bronze Age. Their decline remains one of archaeology's most compelling unanswered questions, not because evidence is absent, but because every new discovery reveals a civilization far more sophisticated, resilient, and interconnected than anyone once imagined. The fate of Tutankhamun, the boy king whose final days remain a mystery. Few names from the ancient world are as instantly recognizable as Tutankhamun. His tomb, discovered nearly intact in the Valley of the Kings, transformed archaeology and offered an extraordinary glimpse into the wealth and craftsmanship of ancient Egypt. Gold-covered shrines, finely crafted furniture, ceremonial chariots, jewelry, and the famous golden funerary mask captured the world's imagination almost overnight. Yet, despite the astonishing preservation of his burial, one question has never been fully answered. How did Tutankhamun die? For a ruler whose final resting place survived with such remarkable completeness, the circumstances surrounding his death remain surprisingly uncertain. Historians, physicians, archaeologists, and forensic specialists have spent decades examining the available evidence, hoping to reconstruct the final chapter of a life that ended far too soon. Unlike many ancient mysteries built almost entirely upon legend, the mystery of Tutankhamun combines historical records with modern scientific investigation. Every generation of researchers has introduced new techniques, and almost every new discovery has challenged earlier conclusions. The story begins during one of the most unusual periods in Egyptian history. Tutankhamun inherited the throne after the reign of Akhetaten, the pharaoh who had introduced sweeping religious reforms and founded the city of Akhetaten. Egypt was gradually returning to its older traditions, restoring long-established temples and reconnecting with familiar religious practices. Although Tutankhamun became pharaoh at a remarkably young age, his reign represented an important moment of political and cultural transition. Much of the administration surrounding the young king was likely guided by experienced advisors, senior officials, and members of the royal court. Together, they faced the challenge of restoring confidence after years of dramatic religious change. Despite the importance of his reign, Tutankhamun ruled only for a relatively short period. Then, unexpectedly, he died. His death appears to have come while he was still a young man. Exactly what caused it remains one of Egypt's greatest historical puzzles. For many years, speculation filled the absence of certainty. Some proposed that the young king had been the victim of political intrigue. Others imagined palace conspiracies involving ambitious officials hoping to gain influence after his death. These ideas became popular because royal succession often involved complex political relationships. However, responsible historical investigation requires evidence rather than imagination. Modern archaeology has therefore focused on what can actually be observed. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 provided an extraordinary starting point. Unlike many royal burials that had been disturbed in antiquity, his tomb preserved an enormous collection of objects in their original context. Every artifact helped scholars better understand royal life during the 18th dynasty. Yet, the mummy itself attracted equal attention. Early examinations revealed little that could explain the king's final illness or injury with confidence. As medical technology advanced, researchers returned repeatedly to the remains. X-rays offered the first opportunity to study the skeleton without disturbing it extensively. Later, computed tomography, better known as CT scanning, provided remarkably detailed three-dimensional images of the body. These scans transformed the investigation. Rather than relying solely upon visual observation, specialists could examine bones, joints, and anatomical structures with unprecedented precision. Some early interpretations suggested that a fracture near the skull might indicate trauma. This led to widespread speculation that Tutankhamun had been struck on the head. The theory attracted enormous public attention. A mysterious royal death seemed to invite dramatic explanations. However, later studies challenged this interpretation. Researchers concluded that much of the apparent damage likely occurred after death, either during mummification or during the careful removal of the mummy from its burial equipment many centuries later. The evidence for deliberate injury became far less convincing. Attention then shifted elsewhere. CT scans revealed that Tutankhamun had experienced problems affecting one of his legs. Some researchers suggested that he may have suffered a significant fracture shortly before his death. If true, such an injury could have complicated his health considerably. Yet even here, uncertainty remains. Determining exactly when ancient injuries occurred is often difficult. Scientists therefore avoid drawing conclusions that exceed the available evidence. Another important line of investigation involves genetics. Advances in ancient DNA analysis allowed researchers to examine relationships within Egypt's royal family. The studies confirmed close family connections while also providing insight into inherited medical conditions. Several findings suggest that Tutankhamun may have experienced health challenges unrelated to sudden injury. Some researchers have proposed that congenital conditions affected his mobility. Interestingly, The large number of walking sticks discovered inside his tomb has attracted attention in this context. At first glance, they might appear to be ceremonial objects. However, signs of regular use on several examples suggest they served practical purposes as well. Could the young king have relied upon them during daily life? The possibility remains under discussion. If so, his physical condition may have been more complicated than earlier generations realized. In addition to skeletal evidence, medical researchers have explored the possibility of infectious disease. Ancient DNA studies have identified evidence consistent with malaria in the mummy. Malaria remains a serious illness even today when left untreated. In the ancient world, without modern medicine, it could become particularly dangerous. Some historians therefore suggest that illness, possibly combined with existing physical challenges or injury, offers a more balanced explanation than dramatic theories involving assassination. Importantly, this interpretation relies upon multiple forms of evidence rather than a single observation. It also reflects a broader trend within archaeology. Modern researchers increasingly recognize that historical mysteries often prove more complex than popular stories suggest. Simple answers rarely explain every piece of evidence. Instead, several contributing factors may have acted together. The circumstances surrounding Tutankhamun's burial add another layer to the mystery. Compared with the enormous tombs constructed for some earlier pharaohs, his burial chamber appears relatively modest. Some Egyptologists have suggested that his unexpected death required officials to prepare a royal burial more quickly than originally planned. Certain objects inside the tomb also appear to have been adapted from earlier purposes before being incorporated into the young king's funerary equipment. These observations do not indicate disorder. Rather, they suggest careful efforts to ensure that the burial could be completed according to royal tradition within limited time. Even after more than a century of study, Tutankhamun continues to surprise researchers. New imaging techniques reveal details once invisible. Digital reconstruction improves understanding of burial arrangements. Scientific examination of artifacts uncovers information about materials, craftsmanship, and trade. Every discovery enriches the story while reminding us how much remains unknown. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Tutankhamun's mystery is that extraordinary archaeological discoveries do not always produce simple historical answers. His tomb preserved thousands of objects with remarkable care. Yet the most important question surrounding his life remains only partially resolved. Was his death caused primarily by illness? Did injury play a significant role? Were inherited health conditions an important factor? Or did several challenges combine during his final days? At present, the available evidence supports multiple possibilities, but no single explanation commands universal agreement. That uncertainty is not a weakness of historical research, it is one of its strengths. Responsible archaeology acknowledges where evidence ends and interpretation begins. Rather than forcing certainty where none exists, historians continue testing ideas against new discoveries. Tutankhamun's story therefore extends far beyond the treasures that made him famous. It is the story of a young ruler whose life unfolded during one of Egypt's most transformative periods, whose tomb survived almost untouched for more than 3,000 years, and whose final days continue to challenge modern science. His golden mask may symbolize the splendor of ancient Egypt, but the unanswered questions surrounding his death remind us that even history's best preserved discoveries can still hold secrets waiting to be understood.